Hello everybody, welcome to the county seat, coming to you from San Juan County. We're in the city of Monticello at a place called the Hideout today, and it's not because we're hiding out, this is their community center. Today we are going to talk about Bears Ears and its new configuration. There's been a lot of chatter since the monument was created about local input and control over the planning process and operating of national monuments. This was supposed to have been the first of these kinds of local groups being represented in the management decisions. But there's been a lot of controversy around it. Groups claiming that they're not represented, groups claiming that they were excluded, and the group has now gotten underway. They're up and running. That is going to be the topic of our discussion today. To find out a little bit about what a Monument Advisory Council really is and where it fits in the monument picture, we start with this report from Derek Dowsett.
Carvings etched in the stone at the site of Newspaper Rock span some 1,500 years ago, to the turn of the 20th century. These carvings best illustrate the complex nature of resource planning in the recently proclaimed Bears Ears National Monument. With so much history in the area, there ends up being a number of people who have a connection to the land.
Bears Ears and talking about Anasazi. It's a critical issue. It's something that's it's very sensitive.
The challenge for land management agencies is creating a plan for the newly formed monument that weighs a variety of uses, resources, and protections. Part of the proclamation of the monument also created the Monument Advisory Committee, or MAC, as a varied group of stakeholders to work together to help provide input on current planning efforts.
The Monument Advisory Committee is another form of obtaining public input, and that's unique in that they are a group of citizens that come together representing a variety of interest and expertise, and then help develop recommendations as a group. So they deliberate and work through that problem-solving process, and we benefit not only from their recommendations, but also hearing the discussion, deepening the understanding of the issues.
Membership on the MAC is representative of a number of stakeholders, including a local elected official, state government, paleontology, archaeology, conservation, livestock grazers and permittees, 2 representatives of tribal concerns, 2 representatives of developed recreation, dispersed recreation, private landowners, local business owners, and 2 seats representing the public at large. They represent a consensus-building group who have to work together to provide feedback and input on the planning process, implementation of the plans, as well as items relating to secretarial orders, which could include wildfire, recreation, and rules and regulations within the monument.
And now we have this additional, very powerful feedback because it's consensus-based from a group with a wide variety of backgrounds and expertise, the Monument Advisory Committee, providing us more recommendations and input. So the next step is we take all that, we use that to help us develop a proposed management plan. So we looked at a range of alternatives. We have our preferred alternative D. We'll see if we need to make adjustments to that, choose options, whatever works the best, and then we'll propose that as our proposed management plans and a final environmental impact statement. We'll release that later this year. That triggers a 60-day governor's consistency review, as well as a protest period for those who may disagree with some of the decisions in there. Gives them an opportunity to express that. And the final step would be a record of decision, identifying the final decisions, providing some certainty and surety to everyone in the area for some of the best ways that we felt to manage, to enjoy, and to use the national monuments.
How those plans come together will play out over the next few months, but the mission of the Monument Advisory Committee won't end there, as they continue to provide BLM and Forest Service with input and recommendations through the implementation process. For more information on the plan and the process, please search Bears Ears National Monument on blm.gov. For the county seat, I'm Derek Dowsett.
Thanks. Now we'll delve into the rest of the conversation about how the council is functioning, and now that they're up and running, what kinds of things we might expect in the future. We'll be right back with the county seat.
It's the place where excitement and fun collide. The Juab County Fair in Nephi, Utah, August 3rd through the 10th. Prepare for the extraordinary as we push the limits on excitement at the one county fair that others strive to be, from rodeos to carnival fun. And some tickets are still available to see legendary Texas band Lone Star on August 8th. Special price tickets from $10 to $30 at juabcountyfair.com. Think you know county fairs? Think again. Juab County Fair, August 3rd through the 10th in Nephi.
I moved to Beaver, Utah from Kansas City, Kansas, specifically for this store. I got to help out with the grand opening, and I was really moved by how much the store, this brand, and these cheese products are loved. This resource, this tool was very easy for us to pick out from the crowd because of the support that the state gives. Not only are they there to help you financially grow or economically support your community, they're there as a supportive resource for talking through that process and being there in the long term. It's not just a check-in, check-out, which helped us expand upon this idea of being a cheese shop out of a plant to being a whole consumer experience. The creamery is very unique to the local area because our Utah farmers are the ones who supply the milk. They have a lot of pride in being able to see the store and what it can put out and how it interacts with consumers. So it's very important for us to be able to grow and to spread their message or spread their product and share our love for dairy. It was originally established when local Utah dairy farmers came together to build the plant here in Beaver, Utah. Since then, we've grown to what we are now, which is a full experiential retail space where customers come from all over the United States just to stop and try our products, experience the store, and meet our staff, who are honestly one of the key tie-ins to people stopping through, is that friendly experience that people get to see every day.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're having our conversation today about the Monument Advisory Committee, which is part of the management structure of the Bears Ears Monument. Actually, I guess it's now called Indian Creek and...
That's John.
Yeah, thank you, because I would have not said that right, Ryan. Joining us for our conversation today, Bruce Adams, County Commissioner from San Juan County, a member of the committee, and also Ryan Benally, who is a member representing Native Tribe interests. Thank you both for joining us. I guess I want to start in the fray by just trying to put this in context of the picture. It seemed to me when there was talk about the monument and the management of the monument that this was going to be kind of the steering committee, and that it would guide the resource management plan, the travel management plans, how the monument was to be directed. But it seems like there are already 4 alternatives out there, and you guys are just now discussing it. Did this get delayed in its startup to where it should have been as far as the monument planning process goes?
I believe it did, Chad. I have been asking the BLM when they were going to name the advisory committee for almost a year now. I know that people were asked to submit applications to be on the advisory committee in 2018. I believe that that they started the planning process for the monument back in 2018, and it was concerning to me that maybe they were starting that process without the advisory committee being involved. And from what we discussed yesterday and today here at the Hideout, it's been kind of a rush to make some decisions about the 4 alternatives that are being presented to the public and to the advisory committee at this point.
So, Ryan, do you feel that the BLM and Forest Service in these meetings have been receptive and a little bit more bending about making changes?
I thought they were, because we're making changes to some of the language rather than just the, picking and choosing what alternatives that are set before us. We actually got a chance to change the language that we saw best reflected the interests and tribal interests for people here in San Juan County, as well as a lot of the stakeholders for in and around Bears Ears.
Do you feel like there's good expertise on this committee?
Yeah, Chad, they even had 2 people that were at large to kind of encompass anybody that may not have been included in the proclamation. But the proclamation identified the user groups and then asked people to apply if they felt like they were one of those user groups, to apply to the Department of Interior and be selected as part of the advisory committee. And I think that they have a real diverse group of people on the advisory committee. There may be some that felt like they were excluded, or some people may have applied that were not selected. But it was a process that DOI and the BLM and the Forest Service went through to select the applicants from the people that applied, and I think it represents the diverse group that they tried to get.
Have you been impressed with some of the expertise that's at the table and that's come out? Did you learn stuff?
Yeah, particularly from the archaeologists, and as well as the recreation representation. I'm glad that we have people from Wild River Expeditions from Bluff. They're telling me a whole lot of stuff I didn't really know, and they're just only 14 miles away. Yeah, I've learned a lot. And they come with all this, with the background that would help further along the process.
Well, you know, I didn't get to attend the first day of meetings, but I sat through most of today's. What I felt like was happening is that there wasn't a lot of agenda at the table like we saw in the process of the run-up to the monument. It seemed like people were pretty collaborative and they were pretty straightforward about things. There, you know, a couple of small issues where there were some differences of opinion. But do you feel that, do you have that same sense that I do, that they're progressing that way, or do you think there's some undercurrents?
I think people came well prepared. They had read the documentation, they'd looked at the alternatives, they'd read the proclamation, they'd looked at the charter. I think people came here ready to engage in some productive discussion, and that they had done their homework, and it was pretty impressive to me, all of the diverse interests that they had done their homework, and they had some solid recommendations to make.
Coming from the Native American side of, you know, the advisory committee, it's not just, you know, this background in education and just that I've lived here for 20 to 30 years. You know, myself and the other tribal representative, Alfred Ben, who's also a chapter official, an elected official. You know, we're coming with our culture, and we're coming with, you know, a lifelong experience of living next to bear reserves here in San Juan County. So I think we're pretty much prepared and very efficient.
And this leads me to a point where I want to pick up with. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back here in Monticello, Utah, San Juan County, with our conversation about the Monument Advisory Committee. We'll be back on the county seat in just a minute.
Exploring is an innate part of being human. What if there was a place on Earth that explores your sense of touch, sound, breath, sight, all year long? So take your time and make it monumental. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country, is the place to explore your sense of adventure.
Make your next adventure at Bear Lake. The Bear Lake Valley has something for everyone, all year long. Scenery, skies, water, or wildlife. You'll find what you're looking for at Bear Lake. Bear Lake, where families play year-round.
Mountains to explore. Adventure to be had. A town to fall in love with. Yes, all that in Park City, Utah. Start your adventure at visitparkcity.com.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are in Monticello, San Juan County today for our program, our roundtable. We are discussing the new Monument Advisory Committee or Council that is helping steer the implementation of how these two monuments are going to function down here in San Juan County. So, Ryan, you know, if you walk us back through this whole thing, the entire purpose of the monument as it was originally debated and brought forward was around protecting Native American culture, and that was the driving force behind the original 1.3 million acre monument, and still is the guiding force. From that perspective of Native American input, it seems like there are within the tribes a little bit of conflict here. Could you address that?
Well, I certainly can't speak for any other tribes or the tribal government of the Navajo, but I can speak for myself as a tribal member. From my observations, the conflicts that you mentioned, I'd probably be historical, because we have historical layers that lead up to our own ties to Bears Ears. You know, you have the ancestral Pueblans, you have the Navajo, you have the Paiute, and of course the Ute. And at different certain times, and sometimes overlapping, we have sort of this pull to the area. So I think certain tribal members do have issues where they say we have more priority to the land than others.
So in the startup of this whole thing, in April, there were some comments from other tribal interests saying that this is not a legitimate representation for Bears Ears or the two units, and the fact that there is not fair representation. And so I'd like to get clearly into that and see if we can address that issue, because they have publicly made a thing saying that this was a stacked committee. From your experience or your understanding, what happened there?
Well, I think it's a bit unfair when they say that, because, I mean, we all represent, you know, a fair share of the stakeholders for, you know, people who use the Bears Ears area. Of course, there's a national monument there. To say that we're stacked, I wouldn't say so. I mean, essentially, if you look at We're All Pro Monument and the fact that we're using our own expertise to be on the Bears Ears National Advisory Committee, so I don't see how that is giving us a fair shot, particularly with, you know, the immense amount of education and experience and cultural background that we have for the area.
In 2018, the Department of Interior announced in the charter that there would be specific areas where people could apply if they had an interest or they were a user, and people that had an interest in serving on this advisory committee made application. It was open to everybody. They looked at all the applicants, the Department of Interior, the president, and made their decision based on the applications that they had received. If somebody didn't send in an application, they certainly weren't going to be considered, and that may have happened. And somebody that wasn't considered because they didn't send in an application, I don't know what ground they had to stand on.
To that point, I'd like to say that, you know, the basic structure of the Bears Ears National Monument Advisory Committee was set in stone by the Obama proclamated, designation in 2016. And it's simply a carryover from the President Trump modification. I mean, nothing's changed. So when you actually had that first initial designation of the Bears Ears National Monument back in December of 2016 under Obama, no one had an issue, right? With the structure, with the number of tribal interest representatives on the committee, nothing's changed, carrying over to the Trump modification, and then here we are, and all of a sudden we have this narrative to say that, well, why aren't there any more tribal interests and tribal members on the committee? Well, why wasn't there a problem then? Why is there a problem now? See, that's the big question, and I think it's unfair to paint us as just being stacked against.
In the article that came out in April that the Salt Lake Tribune carried, they listed names of people that they thought were overlooked that should have been in the selection process. Some of them aren't even native to the area. There's some of them who are as far away as from the state of Washington that they felt should have been involved, but just because they were native. I guess my question really is, you and Albert Ben are both local. You live within the footprint of these two monuments. Are you open to all Native Americans from the 5 other tribes to be their representative? Is your door open for conversation about their interests, and is there a way not to have the tribes competing with each other to get things that you think are culturally important?
Well, I think the discussion and the dialogue is already there. I mean, there's an avenue for them called the Shushtaq Commission, which is laid out in the proclamations. Whether they feel they agree with it or not. I mean, they've had initial meetings with the original Bears Ears Shushtaq Commission, made up of leaders from tribes designated to have their input and their tribal consultations. And then I'd like to just include that at every level, from the U.S. Forestry Service to the BLM, they're always out there pushing tribal consultation under Section 106 constantly, and so it's just really up to the tribes whether they want to include themselves or not at this point.
And they said today that the agency people said they're constantly meeting with the chapters, with the tribes, and trying to consult with them and get their input at every level of the planning process. So I don't think that they've been excluded. I think they've been included more than they normally would have been.
Okay, and that leads me to a point of the great amount of work that lies in front of you. It's a big agenda. We'll be right back with some final comments on that. We'll be on the county seat.
Make your next adventure at Bear Lake. The Bear Lake Valley has something for everyone, all year long. Scenery, skies, water, or wildlife. You'll find what you're looking for at Bear Lake. Bear Lake, where families play year-round.
I promised my son that if he got straight A's, we would take a guy's trip, just the two of us. We were riding on a trail outside a place called Minersville, Utah. There was so much to explore, and the trail just kept climbing higher, right to the top of a mountain called Jack's Peak. We just stood there with the whole world below us, not saying much. In fact, not a word. Later, my son turned to me and said, "I love you, Dad." Suddenly, I realized we weren't just camping, we were connecting.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
It's the place where excitement and fun collide. The Juab County Fair in Nephi, Utah, August 3rd through the 10th. Prepare for the extraordinary as we push the limits on excitement at the one county fair that others strive to be, from rodeos to carnival fun. And some tickets are still available to see legendary Texas band Lone Star on August 8th. Special price tickets from $10 to $30 at JewEppCountyFair.com. Think you know county fairs? Think again. Jewett County Fair, August 3rd through the 10th in Nephi.
Welcome back to the county seat, a conversation about the future of the Bears Ears area and the two national monuments that we have in San Juan County. In this planning process, you guys have a huge amount of work in front of you, and there are some native tribes that are directly, geographically, I should say rather, connected to these monuments. Are their interests being represented?
Yes, I would say so. Particularly with my fellow tribal interest member on the advisory committee. His name is Alfred Ben, an elected official with the Aneth chapter. He has historical ties to Bears Ears. He's one of the descendants of Kayeli, and they're descendants of a great and powerful headman, Navajo headman, who used Bears Ears as
a refuge.
Yeah, as a refuge when we were fighting against the Americans during the campaigns in the 1860s between the Navajos and the U.S. cavalry. So they have strong ties with the area. It's not just Alfred and maybe his little family. I mean, there's like hundreds of them. So I think that him being on there and me respecting him and just learning from him, I think that is hugely reflective of our tribal interests, where we come from, and what we offer to the board.
And that should be a lot of the interpretive stuff that goes into the geographical area. Bruce, as chairman of this group, you have a lot of heavy lifting to do, and you're kind of late in the game. How do you feel that you're making progress?
Well, I thought we made some great progress today and addressed some pretty important concerns about the alternatives. I think we're lifting that heavy load as quickly as we can. I look forward to meeting with the rest of the committee and enjoying their perspective.
You were pretty adamant about the fact that we should only proceed, or the committee should only proceed, as long as everybody's engaged and present. Is that something that you think will keep through your tenure?
Yeah, I do. I want to make sure that all of the user groups are represented and that we hear the voices of those user groups in making any decisions. And I don't want to have a meeting where we only have part of the groups here. I want our meetings to be inclusive of everybody.
It probably goes a long way to transparency. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Appreciate your taking your time. I know you've got busy schedules. We'll let you go. Thank you for tuning in to join us on the county seat each week. Remember, local government, where your life happens. Be involved, be part of the solution. We'll see you next week on the county seat.